Chris, you went into space in 1995. You went up on the space shuttle, docking with the Russian space station Mir. That was 30 years ago. Of course, a lot has happened since then. As of March this year, looking at the numbers, citizens from 47 countries have traveled to space. Talk to us about the evolution of space travel.
You know, the whole thing was limited by the launch vehicles that were available. Early on, just starting with Sputnik, of course, before I was born, but the ability to build a machine that could take first satellites and then people to orbit, that was the great choke point. And early on, the only two nations, the superpowers, you had to be a trillionaire in order to fly in space. And that became the great throttling limiter on who had access to space. But technology improves, both since 1957 and since my first space flight in 1995. And that's what has really wrought the huge changes, and why, as you say, nearly 50 different countries of people have been to space. It's because the technology has gotten better, things have become safer and simpler, and therefore cheaper. And that opens up the door, just like all of our previous modes of transportation in history.
Now, you served as commander of the International Space Station, as I mentioned. What was that experience like?
It was an enormous responsibility for the lives of my crew, because on board a spaceship, you are a tiny aluminum bubble of air living in a place of extreme hostility and instant death if there's anything punctures that bubble. And the space station is also almost 40-year project between 15 leading nations of the world. So there's a huge amount of time and money and work invested in it. It's, I don't know how you even value it, 150 billion US dollars perhaps. So as the commander, I felt that every single day. The necessity to do my job right, to carry that responsibility well, to do the 200 experiments on board, to take care of the life and the vehicle, but also to notice the experience. It's so rare amongst all 8.3 billion of us here on the surface. Only a tiny fraction have ever done what we were doing. And so in amongst all the science and the technology, the necessity also to share it and allow other people to not just be entertained, but to perhaps think differently about their own possibilities by looking at what's right on the edge of human capability.
Right, and Chris, when you talk about changing technologies, new improved technologies, what are these core technologies? Is it the fuel we use, the engines we use, the vehicles that take us out there?
It is all of those things, but I think that the two biggest changes weren't on your list, and one is small, high-speed ability to make decisions, early versions of machine intelligence, integrated artificial intelligence, so that things can be far more automated. When I flew on my various space flights, the machines were still very pilot related. They had very primitive computers on the space shuttle, and even the Soyuz that I was the pilot of on my third flight, still very much an analog vehicle. So the one is computing power. The second is three-dimensional positioning. GPS, and then all of the refinements of the global positioning system, sat-nav, that has allowed us to be so much more precise in what we're doing. And that has led, with both of those things, to reusable rockets. And those two words used to be an oxymoron. Yeah. Those two words go together now, to the point that SpaceX and other companies are working on 100% reusable space flight. And that's brand new. And if you can reuse all the equipment, then of course the price drops, and that furthers the opportunity for everybody even more.
And the fact that we can use this equipment, these rockets again, Chris, can we attribute that to the fact that private companies have taken over space exploration to a large extent?
Private companies for profit have always built the spaceships. What has changed is that the technology is now proven, so that the government doesn't have to make every single decision because they are the ones who are willing to accept the risk. Now it is proven enough that a private citizen can buy a space flight, like Jared Isaacman has done a couple times, from a private company and fly in space. that's not a policy decision. That is an improvement in technology decision. And that's what is radically changing it. It's opening up the markets just differently than it could have been 30, 50, 60 years ago.
Now, there are many countries and agencies that are planning robotic missions, human missions as well, to the moon, to Mars. China successfully sent a mission to the far side of the moon and brought back moon rock samples from there. I mean, what are your thoughts on these latest planned expeditions to the moon and to Mars?
When I'm trying to predict the future, and I rely on studying the past, and we have had several opportunities in human history to move into a new continent, but they're rare. You know, you trace back to humans got to the Americas maybe after the last ice age, about 20,000 years ago. We got to New Zealand, not a continent, but a huge island, about only 800 years ago. We only got to Antarctica really about 100 years ago, maybe 110 years ago. And what the moon is essentially is an untapped continent, like each one of those. And what enabled all of those was improvements of technology. So I try and study, how did we do? What did we do wrong? It's why I'm working with King Charles at Astra. It's why, or the Astra Carta. It's why I'm leading the Open Lunar Foundation on lunar settlement policy. What did we do wrong in all of those previous human levels of exploration and settlement? And what could we maybe learn from it so that we can do better now, as we are right on the cusp of not just sending a few early explorers to the moon, robotic and human, but actually starting to land there with the intention to stay and take advantage of that huge untapped resource that has no biosphere, no life at all. You're not disrupting any life. So it's kind of an amazing opportunity. Doesn't happen very often. And so how we do it, I think, is really important.
Right, and Chris, let's look at what's been recently discovered. I mean, Chinese scientists discovered that the mantle on the far side of the moon is cooler than on the near side of the moon. We also had NASA record vibrations of quakes on Mars. I mean, what does this tell you about the future for humans living on the planet or on the moon?
I think it actually teaches us mostly about Earth. If you are a doctor and you only ever looked at one human being, you're going to draw some very precise and very inaccurate conclusions as to what's possible in Homo sapiens, in human beings. If we just look at Earth and we try and understand how planets work and therefore what the future is going to bring, we're going to draw a lot of false conclusions. So by being able to study other planets, and we've seen now with our best telescopes over 6,000 planets orbiting other stars, but to be able to go to the moon and bring back samples, as several countries have, including China, we learned what the history of the moon was and the fact that it was torn from Earth, 4.5 billion years ago. By landing on Mars, as several countries have, we're starting to understand why, if Mars was so Earth-like 4 billion years ago with thick atmosphere and oceans, what changed? Right. And why is it contracting and having little Mars quakes now? And what is the future then for an Earth-Moon economic system and eventually an Earth-Moon-Mars economic system? We're just in early technological access to those things. A lot of it's driven by science. A lot of it is driven by our ability to invent the machines that'll safely get us there. So it's a really fascinating time to be alive.
Right, and as I said in the introduction, you've now also turned your talents to writing fiction. It started with the Apollo murders, a thriller set in the Cold War. Then there was a sequel called The Defector, and your latest book is called Final Orbit. So talk to us about life as an author and how you made that transition.
Well, it was my first love, writing. It's what I like best in school. I've always been an inveterate reader. I'm always reading, one technical book and one sort of thriller book. Being able to access some other human being's thoughts in detail, the way that reading does, I find extremely valuable. It's how I learn most of the things I know. But I knew if I got a university degree in English, they weren't going to let me command a spaceship. So it's been wonderful to get to this stage of life with having been a fighter pilot and a test pilot and a thrice flown astronaut, to now be able to take all that life experience. I've written 3 nonfiction books But there's a tremendous freedom in writing fiction, thriller fiction, kind of the genre that I love the best. You get into the reality of what is it truly like for all the different astronauts and cosmonauts on board, and I love being able to weave that into real history in a way that people learn a bunch about it, but also see just what might have happened.